Good afternoon. Today's webinar is being recorded, so if you object to this, please exit now. I would like to thank you for joining today's webinar, Desktop Virtualization, How to Regain Control and Management of the Desktop, sponsored by Pomeroy. All users have been placed into listen-only mode. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it in on the control panel. Otherwise, we will have a short question and answer upon conclusion of today's meeting. I will now turn over today's meeting to Mr. David Callan.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this afternoon. My name is Dave Callan with Pomeroy, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's Desktop Virtualization webinar. Many of you may not know who Pomeroy is, and so we're going to take you through a brief introduction of Pomeroy, as well as the rest of our agenda. Hopefully you have a chance to see the agenda chart on your laptop or desktop at this time. Again, today we will briefly introduce you to Pomeroy. We will spend some time talking about and providing an overview of desktop virtualization for those of our attendees that may not be familiar or intimate with that topic. We'll spend a few minutes talking about application virtualization as well. We'll do a live demonstration, and then we'll talk about some of the business drivers that you may use in order to justify adding or bringing desktop virtualization into your infrastructure. At the end, as Jeff alluded to, we will have a short question and answer period. Pomeroy is known as a systems integrator or solution provider, and we've been in the IT solutions industry delivering solutions since 1982. As the chart indicates, we've got 25 branch offices throughout the U.S. We also now operate in Canada and in Eastern Europe, and we deliver our services through a complement of roughly 3,700 employees around the world. Pomeroy has grown through some rapid growth over the last number of years to the point where we are now a company producing revenues of approximately $650 million, operating with an operational excellence model. I'm fortunate to be able to share with you that we are Gartner recognized in several of Gartner's Magic Quadrants, and we can certainly provide you some additional information on those sets of solutions in a different time. We carry some of the highest accreditations from our major sponsoring partners, as well as a number of other partners that we have conducted business with over the years, each designed to bring best-of-breed solutions and technology offerings to our clients and our prospective customers. What you should have in front of you today now is a somewhat busy chart. I'm not going to take you through it, but it is a depiction of what Pomeroy delivers for our customers today. And you can see essentially 6 different segments of the pictorial on the screen at this moment, going anywhere from our consulting and professional services in terms of project delivery. We perform staffing augmentation and permanent and temporary staffing placements. We provide procurement and logistics services for a number of our customers, everything from acquiring assets to deploying those assets, supporting them, all the way through the full life cycle of retiring and brokering those devices out. We perform data center services, remote monitoring and management services, and we provide outsourced service desk and end-user computing solutions as well. Just a brief representation of some of the clients that we've had the pleasure of doing business with over a number of years. Of our largest 150 or so clients, the average tenure of those relationships now exceeds 10 years. And so Pomeroy has, we believe, sort of carved a very nice niche in terms of being able to deliver not only a breadth of services and solutions, but also a depth of solutions that keeps us relevant and the solutions we bring to the market relevant to our clients as we help them solve some of their toughest IT issues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Tom Hurt. Tom is one of Pomeroy's data center architects, and we're going to drive into the agenda here, introducing you to desktop virtualization with our overview. Tom?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get going here talking about desktop virtualization. I'm going to begin the presentation and We'll talk quickly about what VDI means for those that have heard that acronym. VDI is an acronym that stands for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. You may have also heard the acronym HVD, or Hosted Virtual Desktop. VDI is a concept as to which a desktop is serviced out of the data center, whereas HVD is a technology that provides a terminal services like view into a shared desktop environment. So what is VDI? VDI is delivered out of the data center. Your virtual desktop is delivered on your back-end infrastructure, which is secured and positioned within your data center, and that desktop is presented out to remote users on a variety of devices: mobile phones, computers, laptops, tablets, smartphones, etc. And this desktop can be accessed from virtually anywhere, so long as the user has connectivity back into the data center, whether that be over the internet by means of security that we'll place on top of this to protect the end user, or from within your local area network. So the desktop runs back in the data center, secured and hardened, protected from potential theft of the device, meaning a laptop or a smartphone or a tablet that might be running this virtual desktop can actually be compromised, and you as the administrator have the capability to unentitle access to that desktop of the user, in fact securing the desktop so that it can no longer be accessed from that remote device, keeping it secure within the confines of your data center. We'll talk more about what this is in a minute, get through the slides, and then we'll actually go into a presentation. But before I talk more to what VDI actually is and what that means, I want to talk about what VDI is not. VDI is not, it's not for everyone. Those that are familiar with server consolidation in a traditional virtualized environment, that's not the purpose of doing VDI. It's not the huge CapEx saver that those of us that are familiar with server consolidation typically think of when we virtualize our environment. It's not for everyone. There's going to be circumstances where VDI might not be the right fit for your user. We can talk about when those instances are appropriate or when they're not appropriate. We can also help guide you through the understanding of when or when not to use this with a particular type of user in the environment. Application virtualization. Application virtualization is a term that we use to describe portability and management of applications that we encapsulate and present to a virtual desktop. Conceptually, if you think about decoupling the application from the underlying OS from the user, these are three distinct areas in the environment that right now those of us who are administering desktops today have difficulty with, both in terms of managing the user's profile, the applications that are delivered to that user, and then the sustainability of that endpoint or that desktop and the OS that's running on that endpoint. Application virtualization allows us to take a section of this tangled web that we've now created for ourselves when managing the desktop and abstract the application from the underlying OS, putting it into a virtualized container that becomes, quite simply, more portable and more easy to deploy in the environment. You now no longer have the traditional issues that you have when trying to present conflicting versions of, for example, different web browsers, and we'll go into that here shortly. But you can now run applications that normally would not be able to run with each other on the same desktop and present those to end users and allow an end user to access an IE6 web browser as well as an IE7 web browser and an IE8 web browser, all from within the same virtualized desktop. This is something that has never been possible in the past, because when you install an application in a traditional fashion in the environment, the application has registry hooks and It lays itself down on the file system in a variety of different areas. So as the administrator, we're constantly struggling with trying to maintain that application that we've deployed and patches to that application and updates to that application. And each time a new version of that application comes out, we have to somehow figure out how to redeploy that application to the desktop. By virtualizing that application, we simplify this deployment model in that we're delivering a single executable to the desktop. That single executable is a self-contained executable that can be streamed over your network or deployed within tools that I'll show you here shortly. And what you'll see, what will happen over time is in doing application virtualization in conjunction with virtual desktops, we start to untangle the user profile from the application, from the desktop, yet we don't lose any of the traditional benefits or necessities that we need as an end user in the personalization and customization that we need and expect from our endpoint. So application virtualization allows us to have a more simplified deployment model to the desktop for delivery of these applications, and layering on the virtualized desktop allows for a more seamless and easy management and continued management of this environment. So I talked briefly about this already. A virtualized app is a single executable. No registry changes are necessary because this application is self-contained. All the registry changes are localized within this container. I should also mention that this is, of course, a Windows-specific technology. So when we're talking about application virtualization and we're talking about virtual desktops, we're talking about a Windows-based computing environment. These applications can be streamed or they can be pre-deployed within the image that we'll take a look at here shortly. You also have the ability to deliver these from a USB device. You can deliver these through terminal services or even Citrix. So the end user experience, if you will, is simplified. It's a simple and easy to use delivery method as the administrator of these applications into this environment. And of course, no drivers, because this is all self-contained within a perimeter, if you will, with a container. No additional changes are necessary to the underlying guest operating system. So that said, let's actually take a look at what a virtual desktop is. There's a couple ways that you can access a virtual desktop. Virtual desktops can be accessed via a client, a thin client, using traditional technology such as a laptop or an existing device that you might have, whether that be a tablet or a phone or a laptop or an existing desktop. And that's also some of the beauty of this, is that we can start to extend the life and no longer have to have these devices that have high memory and CPU requirements. And as the desktop evolves and operating systems evolve, i.e. Windows 7, and as we think about Windows 8 and the additional system requirements that come up with those, we now no longer have the challenge of having to go and revisit all these desktops and figure out if they are going to be compatible, if their system resources are adequate enough to sustain the next version of Windows. So I am going to access a virtualized environment now, a VDI session. I'm going to demonstrate that via a client that's installed locally here on my laptop. And what you'll see here is that I have this is called a connection broker. And what I'd like to point out is that I am running a lab environment that's based in Philadelphia, yet access to this environment is being made over the public internet securely via a broker server that's positioned in Philadelphia, yet I'm physically located in Pittsburgh, almost 350 miles plus away. So the experience that you're going to see today is a great use case, and this may or may not be a good use case for your environment, but a mobile user in the environment that you need to provision a desktop for and provide some applications to that user on a variety of endpoints can now be serviced so long as they have broadband internet. And that's in fact what I'm going to be using here today is my broadband internet to connect to a desktop that's back in my securely connected back in my data center. So as you can see, I've hit the connect button. It's now asking me for a username and password. I've done some configuration in advance of this, and I've allowed my user here being T-Hurt, I've allowed this user to a couple different desktops in my environment. So what I'm doing here is I'm logging into my environment. It just accessed my Active Directory environment, and it verified my credentials. And based on my credentials and some configuration that I've done in advance of this, it's now presenting me, my user T-Hurt, with 3 different desktops. So this user T-Hurt could be a marketing user. This user T-Hurt could be a sales professional, or this user T-Hurt could be an IT professional. But the point is that you can now do role-based access into the environment, and you can allow users, based on their role within the organization, you can allow them or disallow them to certain types of desktops in the environment that have perhaps your corporate standard gold image deployed for their role within the organization. So I'm going to log into my Windows 7 desktop, and what you'll see, should have just switched to full screen. What you'll see is it looks just as if what you had seen before. It's my desktop. This looks no different. The point being, your users have no idea. Once you take them to a virtualized environment, they will not know that they are on a virtualized environment. The look and feel is identical to what the user experience is to today, except the advantage here is that this desktop, I'm going to put this into a windowed mode so you can see this more easily. But this desktop is now, for those that are familiar with terminal services, is in a terminal services-like view. I want to point out, though, that the technology that we're using here is something called PC over IP, which is vastly superior to that of terminal services. And we can talk more about that, but know that the PC over IP technology is optimized for low bandwidth, high latency networks, and delivery of the end user experience such that it looks normalized to the user so that they don't realize that the experience shouldn't be any different than what they're used to today. So I've logged into my desktop here. And I should also point out, I logged into this desktop via what's referred to as a thin client installed within the desktop that I'm working from. However, as we look to do deployments, and perhaps as you might look to do PC refreshes in the environment, there's what's also called a zero client. Zero clients allow users to access this virtualized environment with no hardware at the endpoint other than a zero client, which basically looks just like a monitor and nothing more. So the virtual desktop that I have here, I'm going to show you a couple different things here, and what I want to highlight with this virtual desktop is the experience. Like I said, it's the same. There's the user has the user experience is identical to what they know and are familiar with here today. And what I've done, though, however, is I'm showing you several different web browsers that are virtualized and presented back to my VDI desktop. So I have an IE 6, 7, and 8 web browser loaded here. And this is something that you've never been able to do before in the past. So the fact that I have IE 6, 7, and 8 on here, a lot of users, as we're working with our clients, a lot of users can't even go from a Windows XP migration to, say, a Windows 7 migration because they have requirements. They have applications that have requirements for IE 6. And before their desktop team can even come up with a strategy, you have to go back to your developers and recode your application so that it's compatible with IE7 or IE8 or whatever's out there today. So I'm running a Windows 7 virtualized desktop here, but in fact what I'm running here on the forefront is actually Internet Explorer 6. And what I've done here is in advance of this, I've actually made a virtualized application of IE6. So it's a self-contained executable. I'm going to hover my mouse over this for just 1 second, but the executable is a self-contained, fully isolated application that's running on this desktop. Yet I can also, side by side, run Internet Explorer 8 browser. So notice having these two browsers side by side, this is a great example of application compatibility. The fact that I virtualize these applications and they're within containers, isolated containers from each other, I can now have applications, and I'm only showing you Internet Explorer, but I can now show you where applications that previously in the past would have conflicted with each other, now no longer. They can run side by side on the same desktop without compatibility issues. So I have Internet Explorer 6, I have IE8 open. I also want to show an example. I have another virtualized application here. Now, again, when I packaged these applications, I named them this, and that's why they're showing up in my start menu this way. But you have flexibility when you deploy these applications, how you'd like them to be presented to the end user. But I've also done something else here, and I've also virtualized Microsoft Office. So Microsoft Office, having to deal with the deployment of Office within as new versions of Office come out and trying to visit the desktop and install a 2 GB installation media into each one of these desktops, it can be cumbersome and challenging for an administrator to do. But I'm going to run, for example, Word 2010. As Word launches here, you'll notice in my lower right-hand corner, you actually saw a notification window indicating that a ThinApp application was about to run, but Word will launch as if you were running this, no different than if you were running this on a traditional desktop in your environment. What I want to point out, though, however, what's different about this instance of Word versus what you might normally think of today, this copy of Word that I'm running is actually streaming over the network. It's not even installed on this virtual desktop. I'll show you what the virtual desktop is in a minute, but I want to highlight the fact that if I look at where, I'm just looking at the shortcut to see where Word is pulling from, but what you're going to notice is that I've actually created a repository of all the applications that I've virtualized in my environment, and I've strategically stored them on a file server in my environment, in my small little demo lab, where all of my virtual applications now reside, and that's now my application repository. And as the administrator of this environment, I can now, based on role-based access in the environment, either say a user in the environment can either have or not have access to this application, and I can say, rather than installing that application onto the gold image, I can actually stream it now over my network. And so when I talk about streaming, there's no footprint at all of this application within this VM. It's completely running from this executable that's being serviced off of a DFS file server in my environment. The advantages of doing something like this, where I'm streaming the presentation of this application to the virtual desktop, is that it's almost like a just-in-time delivery. So as I click through the menus for the application, the content that you're seeing on my screen is literally being just-in-time delivered to the endpoint so that I get a very quick and responsive launch of the application without additional waste for the user to sit there while the application has to come down and stream to the environment. Obviously, the Office suite is close to 2 gigabytes installed. The challenge of streaming 2 gigabytes over the network, you don't want to do that, obviously. So application streaming allows me to quickly stream just the required components necessary to view the application on the endpoint. I want to flip over here real quick and show you the vSphere client. For those that are unfamiliar with the vSphere client, vSphere is the management interface to VMware. It's your management interface for ESX servers in the environment. The desktop that I'm actually running from, this desktop, this Windows 7 desktop that I'm showing you the start menu of right now, in my environment actually happens to be this VM back here in my data center. So again, the advantage of doing virtualized desktop is that, or one advantage is that this desktop is now secured back in my data center. I'm working remotely in Pittsburgh off of my laptop, accessing my virtual desktop. And should I either A, lose my laptop, or B, have a hardware failure of my laptop, I can still switch over to a tablet or some other device that I might have here and still get the same presentation with the same applications delivered to this user, T-Hurt, that's logged into this environment. And I don't have to worry about I don't have to now worry about backing up that user's laptop or risk that user losing his laptop or having it be stolen. Interestingly enough, we're using a technology here called thin cloning or thin provisioning, where I have a gold image. But I've made an image, a template image, which is my standard gold image in the enterprise, which has no applications installed in it whatsoever. And we'll actually go over to the administration console here in 1 second, but I'm presenting that desktop and installing those applications onto the desktop at time of provisioning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the admin interface to this so that we can actually take a look at this pool of desktops I've created. As you saw when we first entered the environment, I had my user, Tom Hurt, had 3 different subsets, 3 different options made available to him. And I told you that I had entitled that user, T Hurt, to see all 3 of these desktops. But we can do role-based access, and we can install different applications on different desktops within the organization. Sorry, I'm trying to log in here. Just log in here. But I can present that desktop without having to go through and install all these applications, without having to install all these applications on this image here. I can represent this desktop out in the form of a pool. We have a concept of a pool of desktops where I can say how many desktops I want presented to my environment, who can actually access that desktop. That would be an entitlement. So I've granted 2 users in my lab environment access to this desktop. And I'm going to take a look at one other one just to show you the entitlements of this marketing pool that I've created. But entitlements can be serviced on an individual user or within a group and Active Directory. So as we start to think about role-based access in the environment now, as a new user joins or leaves the organization, based on their role within the organization, I can drop them into a group within Active Directory. And I'm going to skip over to another part of the administration console here, and I'm going to show you some of these thin app applications. But based on that user's entitlement, based on the desktop that they've been assigned to in the organization, I can I can then say what pool of desktops that application is actually delivered to. So, for instance, I'm looking at Internet Explorer, a thin app package that I've pre-configured here, which is Internet Explorer 7. That package is only made available on this Windows 7 pool that's defined over here. So the ID Windows 7 corresponds to what you just saw on the previous screen. But if we now start to think about role-based access in the environment, and I start assigning applications to pools of desktops, and I then entitle users based on their role in the organization to a pool of desktops, I now have an environment which is completely dynamic, where users can come and go, and the desktop image that's serviced to that user is customized to their role within the organization. The other thing that's of value here, I'll take a look at one of these here real quick so we can see some high-level settings. You can do some really incredible things with this now because we've virtualized this desktop or this pool of desktops. Keep in mind, over here I'm showing you that the 3 different pools. You know, there's a marketing pool, there's a sales pool, and there's a Windows 7 pool. I'm right now editing the properties of this Windows 7 pool. That Windows 7 pool, though, right now is made up of 3 desktops in this demo environment that I'm showing you here. So this Windows 7 desktop, though, what I can now do is I can redirect some of the information, some of the profile information that makes that user experience for the user T. Hurt in my environment specific for his role in the organization, meaning my user has preferences in the environment. I have bookmarks in my web browser. I like my Word presentation to the layout of that to be in a certain format, and that information is all stored within my profile. And because my profile is decoupled from this desktop, I'll click over here so we can take a look at some of these other settings. But because this profile is decoupled from my underlying desktop, when my user logs out of his desktop, I can now throw away or delete that VM that was hosting my desktop, and I don't lose any of Tom's preferences that he had established prior to logging into that desktop. So it's almost a follow-me approach, if you will. So Tom's preferences follow him throughout a pool of desktops in the environment. So every time Tom logs into this environment, Tom may or may not get a new desktop allocated to him, but his settings will follow him from any desktop that he logs into. And because we've allocated the applications that Tom's role in the organization performs, those applications will also follow Tom, and his preferences follow him as he logs in. So that if that desktop that Tom is working from now gets, let's say, a virus, I can simply ask Tom to log off of his desktop and log back in, and a new desktop is provisioned on the fly. He's immediately able to log back into the environment, and whatever challenge had faced him before, corruption, etc., will be destroyed with the deletion of that VM, and he'll be presented a fresh, clean desktop. Quite literally, the gold image that I had initially set up when I was showing you Virtual Center, this was a fresh image of Windows 7. Tom will literally get a fresh image of Windows 7 deployed to him with brand new applications layered right on top of that Windows 7 desktop, and all he's done is log out and log back in. So from a management perspective, you as the administrator or I as the administrator, we now no longer have to go out and physically visit Tom at his desktop. We can simply ask him to log off and log back in, because keep in mind, Tom could be out in the field someplace. Tom might not be on my local area network. So we can have Tom log out and log back in, and the applications that I've presented to him and all his preferences now follow him. He doesn't lose anything by doing so. And in fact, as the administrator, we've not had to visit him or perhaps spend any time or waste any of both his time and your time trying to troubleshoot the underlying desktop issue, which might have just been due to him going to a website that injected some malware into his web browser. So we'll flip back over here one more time here. So I'm showing you different settings here within the desktop. The naming pattern, for example, is something this desktop, as these things get provisioned and spun up, these desktops are automatically joined to your Active Directory domain, and we can do things with the placement of these within your OU within your OU of Active Directory to possibly even apply additional. Should you perhaps have something like Altiris or some other software deployment mechanism out there, you can continue to use that deployment software, but placing the desktop into this OU and Active Directory allows you to automatically join that desktop to the Active Directory environment and leverage an existing, if you have such an existing infrastructure, leverage the existing tools that you're familiar with today in managing that desktop, both in terms of security posture and possibly application delivery. I'm going to jump back over here to these thin applications here real quick and take a look at, let's just take a look at another one of these here. So again, I'm showing you a Internet Explorer 6 application, and it's only assigned to this Windows 7 pool that we've taken a look at. Drilling into it further, though, however, you can see where we can start to set some permissions around this application, and in fact, application virtualization becomes a great mechanism to either track or limit the deployment of applications in your environment, because if we're servicing these applications to users within Active Directory or groups within Active Directory, I now know that no more than the number of users within that group in Active Directory will be served this application to their desktop. So my license management for that application is greatly simplified, because now I know, we find a lot of organizations struggling with trying to understand what users in their organizations are using what applications, and they don't have any ability or insight to track that in the environment. So the fact that we're now taking a role-based approach, and we know that the marketing group has Adobe Flash and Office and all these other applications specific to their role within the organization, I now know that for those applications, I can tell you exactly, based on the number of users within that group in Active Directory, how many users are now actually using that application. Additionally, what I haven't shown you, and I don't think I can show it to you here, but when I packaged this application, there's also some control that I can place around this application so that I can either allow or disallow different users within Active Directory, either based on user or group, access to this application. So I might even take a posture where I deliver this application to all users in my environment, but I now limit the control of that to users within Active Directory. So there's several different ways that you can manage deployment and manage licensing now of these applications in the environment, and the fact that they're not tied to an individual user or to an individual machine means that they're portable, they're flexible. We can now move them across the enterprise, and we can get a desktop delivery that is repeatable time and time again. So with that said, I'm going to exit our virtual desktop demo and hand the presentation over to Colin Henry to discuss some of the business drivers for VDI.
Thanks, Tom. Well, good afternoon. So, Tom, I appreciate you taking the time to show the users here on the call some examples of what virtual desktop and application virtualization does in environments. So just wanted to spend a quick 5-10 minutes and just discuss some of the use cases that can allow you to find ways to make this work in your infrastructures, and also how to justify this to your management. So when we talk about a business case, what are the 3 components that we consist of business value? So one, how does it help us sell more or provide more services of what we sell or the services that we provide to our customers, whether it's internal or external? How do we reduce our cost? And how do we eliminate or mitigate risks to our organization? So what are some of the business drivers that we were able to see within the environment that Tom demonstrated for us today? So the use of different devices. So today we were using a VMware client on a laptop, but we can provide that same infrastructure and that same user experience on a PC, on a thin or zero client device, on a Mac, on tablets, and even now today on smartphones using numerous different operating systems, whether it's Windows, whether it's a Linux-based system, or iOS in the case of an iPad, or Android devices, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. So it allows you to streamline your administration of your end users. So instead of having to support individual desktops or endpoints, you're able to support the virtual machine or that user's instance. It provides you rapid provisioning. So if you were to think today, how long does it take to reprofile an image that gets corrupted? When I talk to clients across the country, that answer goes anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, where utilizing this technology, your help desk has the ability to give a customer or an end user a new image in a matter of minutes. The ability to quickly patch and update your users and their environment, whether it's an Adobe update, a antivirus update, and allow that to simply happen at a logon, and also the ability to support remote sites from a single location. Today we support many different K through 12 sites that have IT staffs that support multiple different locations and will allow them to do many of that help desk activity from a single location. The other piece is how to reduce the cost of your desktops today. So many customers are looking at Windows 7. As we know, Windows 7 requires significantly more RAM than many machines have in it today. So this will allow you to extend your hardware life cycle. You can reduce energy consumption by looking at new technologies such as thin and zero clients. Reduce your administrative cost, whether it's through application deployment or through help desk costs. And it's also going to allow you to increase your users' productivity by reducing downtime, increasing the amount of work that they're able to do within a single period of time. Security is another point that you can't ignore when we look at business value. So one of the things we talked about before was mitigating or removing risk from your environment. Having the data secure in a data center versus having it out on multiple different endpoints, having the ability to lose a hard drive, those types of events. Having that data secure back in the data center makes your auditors feel much more comfortable. Being able to recover from a disaster or continue your business in the event of one. And that could even be something as a hurricane coming near to the coast or a snowstorm, having your users be able to access their environment from home in the event of an emergency, or quickly able to spin up a new site if you were to lose a building. Windows 7 migration, so application virtualization, as Tom showed you before, using things such as ThinApp allows you to take applications that may not be compatible in Windows 7 and still use them in that environment. For example, many customers that I talk to today have custom-built applications that require versions of Internet Explorer such as IE6 that are not supported in Windows 7, and having the ability to not have to rewrite that application, and also simply being able to provision Windows 7 desktops out to users via the connection brokers such as VMware View. So what are some challenges here? One of the things Tom talked about before was VDI is not a gold star. It's not something that's going to fit for every single customer. And some things that you need to take a look at when we look at this technology are end user experience. Many people have concern about what the experience is to their end user and making sure that won't change. I think today's demonstration was a good example of we were using a lab environment over 350 miles away over a Wi-Fi connection, and you saw launching an application such as Microsoft Office, Word in particular, worked exactly the same as you would see on a hard laptop. Connectivity, something that you do need to take into account when you're looking at these kind of environments, ensuring that you do have the applicable network connection. Taking a look at your applications, making sure that applications are not bandwidth hogs or CPU hogs that could cause performance issues. What are your security requirements? Many people consider this environment to be complex and will require more management. What are the startup costs, licensing costs, additional hardware? How do we migrate? And another thing is, just the status quo. Many people think, today our environment works. Well, why can't we just continue along that path? One of the things that we do here at Pomeroy is work with our clients and help address these different challenges through the process of looking at one of these projects. We have several different assessment tools that we can bring into your environment to help answer these questions to ensure your end users are ready, your applications are ready, and your infrastructure is ready, or allow us to optimize any of those environments that may need assistance and help you develop a plan to do that. So with that said, I think we wanted to address a few questions that have been asked. And if you do have any questions, feel free to raise your hand as well, and we can unmute your line and ask that. But we have a few that were sent into the panel here. So let me bring those up, and Tom and I can work on answering those questions to the team. So Tom, one of the first questions I had was from Greg, and Greg asked, what is the user experience on a thin client device? So maybe if you just want to talk about the different support that exists today for the different devices and what users see on that today.
Yep, so Greg, the end user is the experience is no different than what you're seeing here. I was actually accessing that virtual desktop via a thin client. So my experience over a Wi-Fi network, which is probably an extreme case, you saw that Word launches as you would expect in a traditional environment, and that same presentation and look and feel would have been identical if I was accessing that on my Android tablet or my phone, or even a Zero client.
Great. Another question that was brought up is PCI over P protocol available in both Citrix and VMware View?
Yeah, excellent question. So the PC over IP protocol is VMware specific. Citrix also has its own technology there, which leverages the ICA protocol. So similar technologies, similar outcomes, but they are indeed vendor-specific protocols that are provided, whether it be PC over IP for VMware or ICA if we're talking about a Citrix environment.
One thing that I think is notable about the PCI over IP environment is that with VMware's recent launch of vSphere 5 and View 5, that environment now uses significantly less bandwidth to allow some other capabilities. One of the things that we see View now support is 3D graphics, and there's some other new enhancements in that product set. Another question that was raised was around the drive mappings. Are these passed to that virtual device via Active Directory? And maybe if you just want to talk about Active Directory integration in a virtual desktop.
Yep, excellent question. So your users and the traditional management of those users within Active Directory doesn't change here. What I had demonstrated was that you do entitle users to desktops within the environment, but if you have scripts that might be doing drive mappings or otherwise, or even placement of those users within a container within an Active Directory and some third-party tool that's layering on some additional security or applying something else to that user as they log in. It's no different than them accessing the environment in a traditional manner. The only difference here, if you will, is that the extra step, if you will, is that I need to entitle that user or that group to a pool of desktops in the environment. But again, any scripting that you might have done within the logon profile, etc., none of that changes. It's exactly what you're used to today in managing users within Active Directory.
Another question that we had wrote in from the panel, the user profile within View, is it created the first time that they log into the virtual desktop? And maybe if we just want to touch a little bit about profile management within virtual desktop, as that is a little bit different.
Yep. This is an exciting time right now with VMware. VMware actually released a new version of View, View 5 actually, just at VMware World for those that were in attendance. But it has a new component to it called View Persona. View Persona is traditionally in the past, and what I didn't show you is we can do a couple different things with that user profile. You could perhaps use roaming profiles and retrieve that user's profile information from, pull that from your Active Directory environment, and it will obviously, roaming profiles by nature copies that entire profile down as the user first logs into the environment. As the user then logs on and logs off subsequent times, that profile, again, if you're using something like roaming profiles, is then copied down to that machine each and every time the user logs on. So clearly, that is not an optimized way, if you will, to handle profile management within this environment. However, with the introduction of View Persona Management, they have a similar technology where, as to the application virtualization, where it streams only the required components for that user profile to the desktop upon login. So let's say that you have a user that has a 100 gigabyte profile. When that user first logs into their desktop using a traditional fashion of something like roaming profiles, it would copy that entire 100 gigs down, and that user would have to wait while that happens, and then they have to wait for it to synchronize when they log off, and then you also have issues with locking, et cetera, and corruption of the profile, and there's a lot of challenges there. But with the new component, the View Persona Management within View, we now only stream just the components of the profile that are required to the end user, and it's delivered in a just-in-time format.
Great. Another question. Can you briefly discuss recommendations around printing in this environment?
Yep. So printing has always been a challenge. You can continue, depending on what your security posture is. If the endpoint, let's just say that you're working off of a traditional desktop as I am here, and accessing your View environment via a thin client, as I'm doing here, I could have a USB printer attached to my computer, and depending on my security posture in the environment, either allow or not allow access to my local print device that's made available to me to my local endpoint, which happens to be my laptop in this environment. If you have additional network printers in the environment and mapping and management to those printers, the printing and spooling is no different than what you do today within the environment. There's no net change to how you're going to manage the printers and the like in the environment.
There's actually some capability within View of a functionality called location-based printing that recognizes where the user is within the environment and will select the closest printer.
That's actually an excellent point, Colin. We have clients that perhaps maybe an example would be a large university where users are in lab environments and traveling around the organization, but with location-based printing, the user may access a desktop that's in a lab one time and access a virtual desktop that's in a lab that's in a completely different part of the network. And with location-based printing, it'll print to that local print device that's local to that lab environment. So excellent point. Thank you.
And one last question here is, are there large differences between VMware and Citrix? This client utilizes both today on the server side, but was wondering what was the best on the client side. I guess I'll give you my take to start on this, and then see what Tom has to say. We are strong partners with both VMware and Citrix. Each one of their products has use cases that work best in different environments. So that's kind of more of an offline discussion on what some of those different use cases may apply best to a Citrix deployment versus a VMware deployment. Some of it also depends on what your physical infrastructure looks like today from a server perspective, from a network perspective, and also from a how many locations you're supporting perspective.
And I would only echo that and add that when we come out and look to do an assessment of the environment, we're looking specifically to understand those requirements, and based on that, we can determine what method is best for that end user and that desktop.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have right now, and we just, in the interest of people's time, want to be respectful of that. We'll just close this out, and if anybody does have any additional questions, if you want to raise your hand, we can stay on and ask that. So on behalf of the team here at Pomeroy, we just wanted to thank you this afternoon for taking the time and spending this hour with us. A couple calls to action that I have here. If you had any interest in what you saw today, please reach out to your local Pomeroy rep. If you do not know who that is, please feel free to contact Tom, Dave, or myself. Our email addresses are on the screen. In case someone has stepped away, my email address is colin, C-O-L-I-N, .henry, H-E-N-R-Y, @pomeroy.com. Or feel free to send us an email, and we can have further discussions. We do have local data center architects in each one of our sales regions, similar to Tom, and I can get you hooked up with both your sales resource as well as one of our pre-sales technical resources. Please stay in touch. We'll be having similar webinars on different technologies, so keep your eye on your email, and please be on the lookout for invitations. If you have any suggestions around topics you'd like to see from us, please let me know, and I'll make sure that those are included on our future webinar rotations. And lastly, the point I'm sure many of you are waiting for, as you know, each attendee will be receiving a Starbucks gift card. You'll be getting a survey in your email within the next 24 hours. Please fill that out. Please ensure that you do put your shipping information on there so we can get that. And also from the survey respondents, one lucky attendee will be selected to win an Amex gift card. So again, on behalf of Dave, Tom, and myself, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And if you do have a further question, please feel free to raise your hand. If not, please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Operator, anything else?
Thank you for joining Pomeroy's webinar on desktop virtualization, how to regain control and management of the desktop. This concludes today's broadcast. Thank you for your attendance.